You're listening to the Greeks Gridiron. Now here's your host, Ethan Haristadoulou.
Welcome back, everybody, to the Greeks Gridiron. I am Ethan Haristadoulou, and today doing something a little bit different. If you notice to my left here, we have ourselves a mock draft simulator. With news slow, the draft approaching, I thought, why not start diving into some of the mock draft fun? I'm not one of those people that buys into the really early mock drafts, especially the ones that start going out before the free agency even happens. I'm very much so a person of like, mock drafts begin to make sense once you're getting like 2-3 weeks out, when pro days are starting to roll through and you're really starting to see who's showing up to what pro day, and things like the Titans canceling pro day visits with guys like Shedeur Sanders and whatnot, because you're really starting to see what is actually going to potentially happen in the draft. So today, using the NFL DraftBuzz.com simulator, we are going to go through pick by pick all 32 teams, round number 1 mock draft here. Let me know in the comments section down below. I am more than open to doing this for specific teams as well in the lead up to the draft, just kind of a fun thing to do. I'm by no means a draft expert. I'm just somebody that follows the league. I took some time, sat down, looked at everybody's needs for that first round, and kind of went through and put together what I think would be a sensible mock draft without any trades. I feel like I need to clarify that. We will not be doing any trades here because at the end of the day, again, I am no expert by any means. I don't want to sit here and act like I am, but I do feel like I have a good grasp as to what teams could potentially be doing with their first round pick if they were to just stay put and make a selection here. So we're basically going no trades, just diving through. Maybe I do this again down the road and we go with trades. I'll make some moves and try to make sense of all the moves. But the reality is that compensation and all that is so all over the place when it comes to this. I figure just stick where everyone is. We'll make some selections and see what you all think. So fire away in the comments down below. Let me hear if you want to see me do your team specific. I would be more than open to doing so and doing the research for it. But we will begin at the very top and work our way down here. So again, to my left, and if you see me looking to my left a lot, it's because I got my screen up here so I can see the mock draft and discuss with you all. But with the very first pick in the draft, it's the Tennessee Titans, and it's really starting to feel like it's quite obvious what's going to happen here. There's obviously always the potential that there is some big swerve and some big, smoke screen going on in Tennessee as to what exactly it is that they want to do with that first selection here. But I feel like I would be lying to myself or any one of you that are watching if I felt like they were going anywhere besides Cam Ward at this point in the draft process. It just feels like he is going to be the guy that they select at pick number 1. I'm sure they have offers for that number 1 overall selection. It is the top pick in the draft. It's the most highly coveted one. But with a team like Tennessee that desperately needs a quarterback, that has shown out to a lot of events, especially Cam Ward's bringing not only their coaching staff, their front office people, but bringing people from their .com and TV production crews to go and basically document the pro day for them. That feels like a team that wants to have a package put together for when they make their eventual first overall selection. And Cam Ward, in my eyes, has kind of separated himself as the top quarterback in this draft, as the number 1 selection of this draft, considering that the top team in the draft also needs a quarterback. It all just makes too much sense at this point in time for me. So I settled on Cam Ward at number 1. This is where things do get a little bit interesting in my eyes, though, because the Cleveland Browns, they need a ton. And I'll tell you guys right now, I did this mock draft already on my own. I laid out how I'm going to explain it all to you all and basically break down what I think makes sense for all of these selections here. And I'm actually going to go with a different pick than I have in my notes here, because after sitting on it for quite some time, I felt like Travis Hunter made a lot of sense for Cleveland here, and I still do, and I wouldn't be shocked if they opt to go with him. He is considered the best player available overall in this draft here through a lot of people's eyes, just because he has so much potential as a corner or as a wide receiver, or potentially even both in the right situation to be able to produce on both sides of the field. It's such a unique situation, and the Cleveland Browns right now, in my eyes, could definitely use a player like him, maybe even an Abdul Carter to pair him alongside Myles Garrett, and you have yourself a 1-2 punch wrecking crew. I've gone on record of saying on the show that I think if you pair Abdul Carter with a well-established edge rusher like a Myles Garrett, or just giving you names and ideas of guys to pair him with, like a TJ Watt in Pittsburgh, something along those lines, established guys that take the pressure off him of being the main pass rusher, it would make a lot of sense, and it would only help him grow as a player. Like if Dallas went and got him somehow in some way and paired him up alongside Micah Parsons, that would be huge for the development of Abdul Carter not having to be the lead guy. I'm not saying Dallas is in play for him, but to just make my point clear. However, after thinking on it more and more, this team desperately needs a quarterback. They really do. And there's a piece of me that wonders how this marriage is going to work if they were to go with Shedeur Sanders. But at the end of the day, the team makes the selection, not the other way around. I know we have had an interesting instance of maybe a guy like John Elway telling teams not to draft him, or Eli Manning forcing his way out of the Chargers situation in his draft. But this feels like, with the Deshaun Watson situation the way it is, with the way that Cleveland themselves has come out and basically said this was a failure of a move on our end, bringing in Deshaun Watson, you got to go ahead and bring in your next guy and get to working on that quarterback spot. And right now, the way I'm feeling, I think we go at quarterback for the Cleveland Browns, Shedeur Sanders at number 2. This opens the door wide at number 3 now for the New York Giants, who do need a quarterback of the future. Yes, you went and got Jameis Winston and then doubled down on quarterback, going after Russell Wilson as well, trying to make a big move there. That is something I am considering with this selection here. I do like the idea of them still going quarterback, maybe trading back down in the first round here, but because I have solidified the selections as nobody's going to move, we're just going to straight up make picks here and go this way. The way I see it, you're either trying to decide between Abdul Carter in what would end up being a really crowded room of pass rushers off the edge, because you still have Kayvon Thibodeau, who he's had up and down stretches at this point. Injuries have been somewhat of an issue, not a super big one, but enough that it is something to consider here. But Thibodeau has been productive when he's on the field and healthy, paired alongside Brian Burns. You go ahead and you throw Abdul Carter in there, and you're basically spoiled all over again when it comes to the edge rushing department. The way I look at this, though, I feel like, for all the reasons we talked about, Travis Hunter making a lot of sense in Cleveland, the Giants need to continue to add an infusion of big talent here. And when you bring in Russell Wilson, yes, you could argue maybe it's still worth going after a quarterback. I don't think it's necessary in the first round for the Giants, and I think there are some options that'll be available to them in day number 2 where they would more than likely go for a quarterback then if they wanted a project. But it feels like the eggs are all in the Russell Wilson basket right now. So for me, I really like the idea of them going after Travis Hunter here, sticking put at number 3 and making that selection there. That is where things get a little bit interesting for the New England Patriots. With Travis Hunter off the board, you still have Abdul Carter. There is still, of course, the option of trading away if there are any available trade compensation packages that you'd be willing to pick up. And for that, I do think it is worth at least noting that trading down is very much a likely situation here. But in the event that the Patriots do not move and they decide to stay put here, I think the big question is, do they go and draft an offensive tackle like a Will Campbell, who with the short arms has received so much discussion surrounding arm length as opposed to his actual play in the SEC? It's kind of mind-numbing at this point now. Or do they go with a top prospect like an Abdul Carter, who, for me personally, I do feel like could help out this Patriots team tremendously. This is a defense that went from being one of the better units in the NFL just a couple of seasons ago to falling off a cliff last season while Gerard Mayo was leading the way. I feel like when you look at Mike Vrabel, he wants to refortify that defense. He wants to be a team that wins through defense, in my eyes. Defensive-minded head coach and a guy who understands what great defenses can do, having been a part of 3 of some of the better defenses in the NFL en route to some Super Bowl victories. So for me, while I do think a Will Campbell here is definitely possible, and yeah, that might even be a reach, I do really like the idea of the Patriots sticking and going with Abdul Carter here, so I am going to go ahead and take the Penn State prospect into New England. Going into pick number 5, we're going to take a look at the Jacksonville Jaguars now, and this is a defense that desperately needs help, more so on the back end than on the front end. You, of course, have Josh Hines-Allen on the edge, paired alongside Trayvon Walker, who actually just had his fifth-year option picked up, I believe, today or for maybe yesterday. I could be misremembering when the news came out, but it is something worth noting here that it feels like you have your duo on the edges of that defense, but that secondary desperately needs work. That secondary is hurting. And when you look at what this Jaguars defense looked like last year as one of the worst pass defenses in the NFL, it makes it pretty clear and pretty obvious what this team needs to do. And it's go out and draft the best cornerback that you can possibly get at this current point here. Now, because we're not trading back, this is something that maybe Jacksonville could consider doing, slipping down a couple of spots and then making this selection here. But ultimately, since we're staying put where we are, and I want to make this selection here to help beef up that secondary, you look at Will Johnson from Michigan, and I think he makes a ton of sense for this team here. We'll go ahead and pull up the draft profile here so you guys can take a look. I mean, at 6'2", 194 pounds, yeah, only a couple of interceptions this past season, but he is a guy that has just been praised up and down for his athletic ability and what he is able to do. You look at some of the strengths here of his scouting report, rare blend of size and fluidity, maintains his back pedal integrity against shifty receivers while using a big 6'2" frame, which for me, I'm a big fan of big cornerbacks. I love the idea of a 6', 6'1", 6'2", a guy who is athletic enough with enough size that can take it to the smaller receivers, but also match up well to the bigger receivers. He's got elite football IQ, nasty competitive streak and press coverage. This team, in my eyes, desperately needs to have that cornerback play improved, and that is where I'm going. Will Johnson at number 5 for the Jaguars. This one right here, I personally have been pounding the table at pick number 6, and to get straight to the point on this, because in my eyes, for an offense that desperately needs a jolt on the ground, when you are relying on Sincere McCormick to be your running back one at a certain point last season, none other than the running back from Boise State, Ashton Jeanty. He just makes too much sense for me for the Raiders here. You have Jakobi Meyers, you have Brock Bowers. Meyers might not be like the number one wide receiver when you think of wide receiver ones in the NFL, but he's a guy that had 1,000 yards last season, paired with Brock Bowers, who also had 1,000 yards himself. You also now have Geno Smith throwing the football. And then, of course, you throw in Ashton Jeanty, and you have playmakers at every single skill position to help make Geno Smith's job easier. I do like the Raiders' offensive line enough that I feel like O-line here is not a necessity. This is where you go and you get a game-breaking running back at number 6 in Ashton Jeanty, who lit the world on fire in college football last year and helped take your offense, to that next level. Now, the Jets right after them, when you look at the team needs on Draft Buzz here, you could see it says wide receiver, defensive line, defensive tackle, which is kind of redundant in my eyes. And then you also have quarterback as well. That is definitely, I think, a fair one. But the way I see it right now, the Jets, I want to see the offensive line get beefed back up. And that's kind of where I'm standing on here. And I understand that there are things that are potentially more pressing here. I do think wide receiver is definitely one worth looking at here. There's been so many rumors around like possibly trading away Garrett Wilson that have swirled in and around New York and just through NFL media. I feel like that idea has been danced around a lot. It would be crazy in my eyes if the Jets just went ahead and moved on from their absolute best wide receiver and you probably should say best offensive player overall. And you're also bringing in a quarterback like Justin Fields now, who I think would only benefit more, especially as a passer, to have more time in the pocket and be able to do what he does and have the option and not necessarily it need to be a necessity to run with the football when those opportunities present themselves. I really like the idea of the Jets going offensive line here. And so with that in mind, and also on top of that, I know the news regarding like the potential committee, running back by committee approach that the Jets are potentially toying with and moving on with Breece Hall. That is definitely something I guess I could see happening considering where their head coach came from in Detroit. But that just sounds like a wild idea. You can still run a committee backfield with Breece Hall. I don't understand why you would need to get rid of Breece Hall to do that, other than just reset the running back room. If you want to do that and have more cost control, and that's where like the rumors of maybe the Jets wanting to trade up for Ashton Genty have popped up now, sure, that's possible. But I like beefing up the O-line, helping out your new quarterback that you just paid a decent amount of money to help him prove himself in this offense here. You have Garrett Wilson, you have Breece Hall, so beef up the O-line a little bit. That was kind of a problem last year and even the year prior as well, and was in part why we saw the offense sputter the way it did last season. And I'm looking on the board here, and I'm a very big fan of his. He seems to be rising up stock boards, and that is going to be the offensive tackle Armand Membou from Missouri. Now at 6'4", 332, arm length 33.5 inches. That's one of those things where you go, okay, it's like around that 33 mark that everyone seems to be hyper focused on right now. That is something to note, but for me, I'm not too worried about that, especially if you want to slide him into guard. And I don't think number 7 is a terrible place for guard. We have seen better guards go even slightly higher than this, or something like, where you decide to put him on the O-line is kind of moot to me. It's just a matter of getting him on the O-line. So if it's in a guard spot, if it's at a tackle spot, because you did watch Morgan Moses depart this year, I think just beefing up the O-line altogether benefits the Jets offense and what they're trying to build there. So we'll go ahead, we'll throw Armand Membou into New York, and then we go to the Carolina Panthers. And this is where one move makes a ton of sense to me, because we saw them nearly land the top player in free agency on a lot of people's boards, and that was, of course, Milton Williams, who it was reported that he was agreeing with Carolina before the Patriots doubled down and said, no, we'll give you more money. Mason Graham on the interior of that defensive line. You wanted Milton Williams. It did not work out. I do think Mason Graham, with a lot of upside and a pretty high floor from what a lot of people seem to think, would make a ton of sense to basically make up for the move that you missed out on the interior. I like Mason Graham. I like what he's able to bring to the table, and a lot of people seem to be very high on him. Guys like Eric Edholm and Daniel Jeremiah, all those guys, a lot of people love him, and I think he would be a great presence for years to come on the interior over there in Carolina. Next, we look at the Saints, and this is one where a lot of people have like quarterback marked if Shedeur Sanders was to slip, or maybe like the Saints are a prime candidate to try to trade up and get Shedeur Sanders over a team like the Browns or the Giants if they are targeting him for their draft. However, if there's no quarterback on the board that's named Cam Ward or Shedeur Sanders here, I love the idea of this team going after an offensive lineman. And this is where we're going to go ahead and target another tackle who, again, we've talked about, Will Campbell. Everyone seems to be concerned about arm length. The Saints could use an addition as a tackle or as a guard. Whatever Will Campbell would wind up being in the NFL, you could start him out at tackle, and if it does not work out, kick him into guard. A lot of people assume he would be a great guard and a good tackle, so if it's not working out at tackle, you can always shift him into guard and he should shine. This is one of those things where you have holes along the offensive line you need to fill, and I think bringing in a guy like him, especially to help out Derek Carr, who feels like he's on his last legs and needs every bit of help he can get in the pocket, Will Campbell, especially not hometown, but coming from LSU, and of course playing in Louisiana, would it not make more sense to just keep him right in New Orleans and beef up the O-line in New Orleans? For the Saints, give me Will Campbell here at number 9. At number 10, we're looking at the Chicago Bears, and I absolutely love what they have done as far as fortifying the interior of that offensive line. It's needed a ton of work, but they do still need one more offensive tackle to really round out what they've been doing here. The overly aggressive pursuit of beefing up this offensive line tells me all I need to know about what they are trying to do next year, and I think Ben Johnson is hell-bent on fixing that issue for Caleb Williams and the offense altogether. The idea of going after someone like a Kelvin Banks out of Texas makes way too much sense to me here to basically finish off what has been a complete rework of the offensive line. You basically went into this offseason needing 4 guys. You've already gotten 3 across the middle. Let's finish off with the final tackle you need to grab. Give me Kelvin Banks here to finish it off. I just clicked the wrong button here. So we got ourselves Kelvin Banks in Chicago to round out the top 10 of the draft. The next selection we have is the San Francisco 49ers. And this is a team that could realistically go in a lot of different places because they need a lot to fix on this roster as a whole. And when I'm looking, you can almost go like best player available in my eyes for the 49ers just because there's a lot of positional needs that they need. And there's one guy that I just kept coming back to who makes so much sense sense for me in San Francisco because of just that team as a whole, very creative with what they want to do. Offensively, of course, led by Kyle Shanahan, but it bleeds over to the defense as well. And they have some stars and some extreme athletic studs on the defensive side of things. And I keep going back to Nick Emmanwori out of South Carolina. I cannot stress enough how much he makes sense to me here. Now, when you look at the rank on DraftBuzz, they have him ranked as the 20th prospect here, but it's really what he did at the NFL Combine that really impressed me. And the production on the field last season obviously speaks for itself when you look at the numbers here. 4 interceptions, couple of passes defensed, 88 tackles, 57 of those solo, but at 6'3", 220, and you look at the numbers, the unbelievable testing that he had at the NFL Combine, 4.38 40. He's got a massive vertical at 43 inches. And again, the height combined with all of that, the broad jump at 138, you like the production you see on the field, coupled with the fact that he is just an unbelievable athlete. This just makes too much sense to me in my eyes when it comes to the idea of, all right, this team needs a lot of work in a lot of different places. Best player available. Maybe he's not the absolute best player available, but when it comes to just overall physical traits and talent, give me Nick Emmanwori to build out a defense that lost a lot this offseason. I mean, a team that lost a lot as a whole, but defense that got picked apart by free agency this year. Now we'll take a look at the Dallas Cowboys here. This is an interesting one. There is a few different moves that I think the Cowboys could make here. Interior of the defense definitely needs some help, especially on the defensive line side of things. You could argue linebacker here as well, but I feel like that's a little bit too high at number 12 as far as linebacker is concerned. That's something you could probably address in day 2 and get away with. But for me, when you think Dak Prescott, you think CeeDee Lamb, you think an offense that just needs a little bit more juice. A little bit more juice. It can't just be the CeeDee Lamb show, and the wide receiver room behind CeeDee Lamb is not one that I'm super fond of as far as the Cowboys are concerned. And I really like the idea of this team targeting a wide receiver. And if you look at the wide receiver board right now, we got Ted McMillan up there, we got Luther Burden, we got Matthew Golden. And for what it's worth, Ted McMillan, a lot of people consider the top wide receiver in this draft here. But Matthew Golden has really come on strong as of late. A lot of people seem to like him more and more. And when you're going after Ted McMillan, he's definitely not the athlete that CeeDee Lamb is, but size-wise, semi-similar in terms of height. When you look at CeeDee Lamb, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, I think he is 6'3", maybe 6'4", but I think 6'3" sounds more correct. But then you look at a guy like Ted McMillan, 6'4", 219. Again, not the athlete that CeeDee Lamb is, but size-wise, kind of doing the same thing. I would like to mix it up a little bit and go after somebody like a Matthew Golden. We'll pull up his profile here. 5'11", 191, smaller. But again, this is a complementary addition to what you have going on with CeeDee Lamb over here. Nice 40 time. He is a very quick burner, 4.29 speed. Again, it's not about the height and the size that we're looking for here. We're looking for a complement on what CeeDee Lamb can do here. And in my eyes, he makes a ton of sense. Projected as a first round mid pick, somewhere within that range there. So in my eyes, Matthew Golden would be a really good fit here, a really nice complement to your passing game. Running back is definitely something I could consider here as well, because I do think that the Cowboys absolutely need to add a new young running back to add some juice out of the backfield. So if you like a running back here, the only option in my head is Omarion Hampton. And while it sounds like he is flying up teams' boards, and he would A, make a lot of sense in Dallas, B, look really nice with the star on the side of his helmet there, I think they go wide receiver and they bring in a guy like Matthew Golden. Next, we're taking a look at number 13. This will be the Miami Dolphins. And for this one here, I really want to go defense. I want to shore up the secondary, because when you look at the secondary over there in Miami, it's basically Jalen Ramsey, Cam Smith, and then just a handful of undrafted free agent guys that have earned themselves starting spots or just have played a significant amount of time over the last season or two. I think you need to go in here and you need to bring in a guy that could eventually become the heir apparent to Jalen Ramsey. He is only getting older, and at this point, staring at the wrong side of 30 right in the face, this is where you probably want to go and get that cornerback. Long are the days gone of when it was Ramsey, Xavier Howard, who was unbelievable for a stretch of You need to go and beef up that secondary. So for me, if you go into the secondary category here, defensive backs, coming right out of Texas, ranked as their 15th prospect on Draft Buzz here. But for me, you look at some of the numbers here, we have ourselves, maybe slightly undersized, 5'11". Again, I am a fan of bigger cornerbacks, but a guy who's played in the SEC, he's seen some of the best talent that you can see at the collegiate level here, and very productive on top of that. 11 passes defensed, not afraid to tackle with nearly 70, and 46 of those being on his own and not assisted. So he is not afraid to get in there and make that tackle. But again, 5 interceptions on top of that with the 11 passes defensed. The production is there. Big school, big conference. He's seen some of the elite competition. He should be ready at the next level here. And again, you're bringing him in as a complement to Jalen Ramsey in this first season. So I love the idea of going Jahdae Barron out of Texas to help beef out that secondary a bit. At number 14, now, for those of you that may not be aware, who maybe are here for the first time or just have not heard me say this, I grew up a Colts fan. My fandom has definitely taken a hit over time. Just a lot of things that have gone on organizationally that I'm just not a fan of. And my Colts fandom has definitely, it's waned over the years. I still love to see them succeed. If that ever happens again, I'll be there for it, and I'll be excited to see it happen. But I'm definitely not ride or die the way I am. I am definitely just a football fan at the end of the day. Colts fan secondary. So you take that for what you will, Colts fans, for hearing me say that. I'm sorry, but I can't really agree with the way things have gone over the last decade and some change in Indianapolis. That being said, this is a team that has been trying to find a way to shore up the tight end position, and for what it's worth, I appreciate the effort in what they've done with guys like Mo Alley-Cox or Jelani Woods over the last handful of years, and it's too bad that Jelani Woods continued to get hurt year over year, because his size, his athleticism was something that I was really excited to see, and he was supposed to be that guy last year. But it's just the same old story of injuries preventing him from being on the field, and we are where we are now. That all being said, as the 17th ranked prospect according to Draft Buzz here, and I would argue probably even a little bit higher than that as far as the general consensus is amongst draft prospects this year, I love the idea of Indianapolis going and getting Tyler Warren here at number 14. There are a couple of other things that this team could address, but for me personally, whether it's going to be Daniel Jones or if it's going to be Anthony Richardson, whatever's happening at quarterback, I think you could only help out whoever it is that your starter is going to be by getting a guy like Penn State's Tyler Warren, just a guy who can do everything that you need him to against zone coverage, good enough as a route runner, and fast enough. Size obviously makes him a mismatch over the middle that he's just going to be a pain for defenses to deal with. You have Josh Downs. You, of course, have A.D. Mitchell, so you're hoping to see improve here in year number 2. And, of course, you can't forget Michael Pittman. There's a lot to work with already on this offense. Jonathan Taylor out of the backfield as well. You get a guy like Tyler Warren to basically round out your skilled position players that you're working with, and this is one of the more exciting offenses in my eyes. Again, there's a couple of other places you could probably see the Indianapolis Colts go, but if Tyler Warren's falling to Indianapolis at number 14, if I'm making the selection, you better believe it's going to be Tyler Warren. At number 15, the Atlanta Falcons. This is where we start getting into some of the edge rushing conversation here, because this is something that definitely needs to be addressed over in Atlanta. A team that struggled mightily to create pressure and get those sacks for a large majority of the season. Maybe found a little bit of success later in the year, and we're at least able to get themselves out of last place chasing after the quarterback. But I do think that this draft is one of those, we need to go in there. We need to address what has been a morbid pass rush, especially off the edges, for quite some time now. I have watched the Falcons try to adjust and, make up for some of that lack of production over the last few years, and I appreciate the efforts. We're going to have to see them swing to the fences here again, and I think you look at a guy like James Pierce out of Tennessee, coming from a big school, SEC guy, some solid production last season, and this one right here makes a ton of sense in my eyes. 7.5 sacks, forced a fumble as well, 30 tackles, coming off the edge. Guy's a really good athlete as well. You love to see the speed that he has there, the power in his legs, really good broad jump numbers as well. 6'5", 245, big man out of the SEC, out of Tennessee. Makes a lot of sense to me, so let's go ahead. We'll bring James Pierce out of Tennessee over into Atlanta. And then to round out the top half of the draft, at number 16, the Cardinals. This is a team that almost like the 49ers, similar situation. You could go best player available. They need a lot of different things in a lot of different places. I could see them going offense. I could see them going defense. I really think that what the Cardinals end up doing here kind of is dictated based off of what happens with the first 15 picks above them if they don't wind up trading up because there's somebody that they desperately feel like they need. But they need so much that I don't think giving up capital makes a lot of sense for Arizona. They've made great strides over the last season, so that is a positive here, and I think you could really swing to the fences. And upgrading that pass rush, this is a guy that I really, really like coming out of Marshall here. Again, sticking with pass rushing defensive linemen. You look at defensive end / edge rusher, whatever you want to call him, Mike Green out of Marshall. And while that might not be the first name that comes to mind, Cardinals fans, you look at the production last year, and that alone speaks for itself. 17 sacks, 3 forced fumbles, 81 tackles at 6'3", 251. Athletic numbers looking pretty good as well. Senior Bowl invitee as well. Somebody who has looked really good over the last year and would make a lot of sense to help beef up that defensive line in my eyes. So we'll go ahead, we'll sign up the Arizona Cardinals for some Mike Green action out of Marshall. Now the next selection we have working in the bottom half of the draft, we'll start with number 17, the Cincinnati Bengals. And this is a defense, especially on the defensive line, that needs a lot of help here. And when I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do with Cincinnati, I was basically either edge or just interior defensive line, somebody who could help generate some pressure to work alongside Trey Hendrickson, because it was literally Trey Hendrickson, and that was about it for the pass rush last year. He was basically the only reason this team came away with any sacks last year. Yeah, he had, a few other guys on the team that maybe netted a sack or 2, maybe 3 if I'm remembering correctly, but it was basically the Trey Hendrickson show. And while they sit there and work through that contract situation he has, especially if in some case he winds up getting traded away, maybe in the draft or later on, who knows, you absolutely need to address this defensive line in some capacity. And with the thought process I'm working with, I assume that Trey Hendrickson is not allowed to walk. That would be quite the whiff in my eyes by the Bengals at this point here with how productive he has been over the last couple of seasons. So I thought interior, and a guy like Walter Nolan out of Ole Miss feels like it makes a lot of sense to me here. If we take a look at his player profile, 6.5 sacks as a big man on the inside would be huge. You're getting pressure off the edge, but now you bring in a guy like Walter Nolan who is productive on the interior. Nearly 7 sacks as a D tackle is a great number to be working with. So big man, big school, and honestly, pretty solid athlete, 6'4", 296 pounds, a little bit slimmer, but only 21 and a half years old, a guy who is also an invitee to the Senior Bowl. This is someone who would be huge, explosive first step off the snap, and on top of that, he's just very, very much able to move and create havoc on the interior of a defensive line. So let's go help Trey Hendrickson in Cincinnati. Let's go find the basically replacement for DJ Reader, who the team allowed to walk. What was it? Not last. Yeah, it was last season. Yes, it feels like longer than that. Time moves in a weird way, but yes. Departure of DJ Reader, never been able to really recover since that, at least on the interior there. So let's help out Trey Hendrickson. I like the idea of a Walter Nolan out of Ole Miss there. At number 18, Seattle Seahawks. Now, when I think of Seattle and I think of head coach Mike Macdonald, I feel like you want a guy to lead your defense from the middle. And when you look at what the Ravens defense looked like while Macdonald was over in Baltimore, you had a Roquan Smith, you had a Patrick Queen, you had guys on the inside, middle of that defense that were just absolute game wreckers, freak of natures, ultimate athletes at that position, difference makers in the middle of that defense. I feel like that is something that the Seahawks are continually trying to find a hole for, find a piece to fill that hole with. And when I look at 18, this is where we finally see a linebacker come off the board. I think Macdonald goes out, he gets himself his linebacker, and while Jalen Walker is on the board from Georgia still, I really am a humongous fan of what Jihad Campbell out of Alabama does. And something tells me that McDonald is a big fan of this as well. You look at this guy's draft profile, productive, 120 tackles essentially, 119. Couple of forced fumbles last year, 5 sacks. The guy's 6'3", 235 pounds. Monster of a man, but also athletic. 4.52, 40-yard dash. The guy can move, excellent broad jump numbers, and you go down and you just look at the things that he is praised about. Explosive first step, coverage instincts are advanced for a converted edge player, serious pop as a tackler, multifaceted weapon who creates matchup problems. This is, and again, spent 20-plus snaps at each the Mike, Will, and edge spots against Tennessee and Missouri. This is a guy who is just unbelievable with the size, the speed, the athleticism, everything that he is able to do. This is who I envision running the middle of that defense, the guy that could be wearing that green dot on his helmet for McDonald's defense. This is the Roquan Smith, Patrick Queen answer that he had in Baltimore that I know he desperately wants to have in the middle of his defense here in Seattle. So I love the idea of Jihaad Campbell going in Seattle. He is a guy that is just proven production. You can line him up. He could even somewhat you look at like a Micah Parsons type of, like, not comparison, but like type of role where you could have him go off the edge. You can have him play in the middle of the defense. Like, he's so versatile with all the athleticism and size that he has and the ability that he's able to work with here. I love the idea of Campbell going to Seattle. At 19, we got ourselves the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and I definitely think edge rusher is where you need to go here with Tampa Bay, and it's the number one need that they have here on Draft Buzz as well. And when you go ahead and you take a look at these edge rushers here, there's a handful of guys on the list, and this is actually where I think you start to see some movement with edge rushers. Again, we've flirted with a few of them here and there, and once we see like guys like James Pierce go off the board and we see another player or two move, that's where I think the run really starts. So this is where we start seeing some of those edge rushers pop off the board here. I really like the idea of going after Georgia's Michael Williams. You look at his draft profile here. We'll pull him up on the screen here. 6'5", 260, 5 sacks, 2 fumbles forced. This is someone who makes a lot of sense to me in my eyes. This is a really young defense that's really starting to put itself together, and this is kind of like the final piece of the pie in my eyes. He doesn't have to be the guy coming in year number 1, especially when you consider that he's being selected at number 19, but he's someone who has great power at the point of attack, natural leverage, brings scheme versatility with the way he plays. He can put his hand in the dirt or he can stand up, and I think that says a lot about somebody when you're looking for an edge rusher, somebody who can play in a multitude of different ways if need be, depending on what the front is being set up as, going up against whatever the offense is throwing at you. So this is one of those things where I really like bringing in a Georgia guy like Williams, to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So we'll go ahead, we'll bring him in at number 19 for Tampa Bay. The Denver Broncos at number 20. I desperately want this to happen. I cannot stress this enough. This is me manifesting right now. I don't know if Tet McMillan could legitimately fall to number 20. I could see another team between number 1 and number 19 making a gamble on Tet McMillan. But if the draft was to play out the way I have it playing out right now, if Tet McMillan's on the board, give me Tet McMillan in Denver to play alongside Courtland Sutton and for Bo Nix. This is kind of my dream setup here. I would love to see a guy like Tet go and work in Sean Payton's offense to help Bo Nix, who looked so good in year number 1. The offensive line feels really good. The running game is one of those things that we'll definitely need to potentially revisit and maybe look at another running back addition there, but I love the idea of a big-bodied guy like Tet McMillan making his way into Denver to play alongside Courtland Sutton. That is my dream scenario for that one right there. And as soon as I got to this point in the draft when I was doing this earlier, prepping for it, as soon as I got to here, I was like, yeah, Tet McMillan, don't even ask me twice. This is who I want to see land in Denver if he's there at number 20. At 21, we got ourselves Pittsburgh Steelers. Now, Patrick Queen does make this selection maybe not necessarily super necessary in my eyes, but I do think that this defense could work with another linebacker on the interior. You could also maybe say, I don't really agree with wide receiver, and I don't know why that's a team need coming from Draft Buzz. Maybe that's just something they haven't updated. Maybe offensive tackle with the departure of Dan Moore Jr. as well. That is definitely something else I could see as well here. But I do think I like the idea of going after a guy like a Jalen Walker. He feels like he fits the style of defense that they run over there in Pittsburgh. And this is one of those things where I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do. Steelers are one of those teams that it took me a little bit to kind of come to the conclusion on this one here, but we'll take a look at his draft profile. Like, we look at some of the numbers here: 6.5 sacks, 61 tackles last year, work in the middle of that Georgia defense. But I just love what he brings to the table, both being an athlete, good size. Again, 6'1", 243, a little bit smaller, a little bit bigger than Jihad Campbell, but the guy is still an unbelievable athlete with that 4.5 speed, so he can move laterally, sideline to sideline if you need be. A guy that can go after the quarterback and do his thing. He just makes a ton of sense. And when I think of Pittsburgh Steelers and some of those best defenses, they always have like an embarrassment of riches at the linebacker spot. And this just feels like a Steelers pick to me. I could be way off on this one. Again, this is one of those things that I wasn't really sure where I wanted to go with the Steelers, and I wasn't sure if this or like offensive tackle was the right way to go, but I don't think it's necessary. I really don't. And I think that when you look at what the Steelers have along the offensive line, they're not in the worst way where they need to go first round O-line. That's something I could see them address a little bit later. And again, when I think of some of those better Pittsburgh Steelers defenses that I've personally grown up with, a guy like a Jalen Walker just kind of fits the mold of what they're doing in Pittsburgh here. So we'll go ahead. We'll throw Jalen Walker on the board. This is one that I will like openly acknowledge that I'm not super sold on, but it just makes sense in my head, if that makes sense to you. So Steelers fans, feel free to fire away on the comments on that one. Next, we got the Chargers, and this is another one I didn't even have to think twice about it when we got to it. And this wasn't one that I set up by any means. There was a couple of selections here where I was like, okay, I do know that I have certain players that I know where I want them to go, and I'm going to try to like make it happen if it's possible and if it makes sense. Like, I'm not going to force a pick because of some narrative I have in my head, but there are guys that make sense in certain places if we get to there and they're there. And this was one that as soon as I got to it, I was like, yup, sign me up. Omarion Hampton, you are an LA Charger. You think of what they are trying to do right now for this offense, and Omarion Hampton behind the offensive line that they have in LA combined. And again, they're going to need another wide receiver. Don't get me wrong. You could very well see the Chargers go wide receiver here, but there's enough talent in day two that you can pair with Ladd McConkey, who was not a first round receiver, mind you. You can go ahead, pass on a wide receiver in round number 1, get him in round number 2, maybe even round number 3. And I think I trust what the Chargers have been doing as far as going after wide receivers over the last handful of years. They've always been very good at bringing in wide receiver talent over there. So give me Omarion Hampton in round number 1. I think you settle on a wide receiver in round number 2 or number 3. But Hampton, the power back that he is, unbelievable ability to just keep himself on his feet when contact is being made. If you have not watched Omarion Hampton film in any shape or form, do yourself a favor. Grab some popcorn, take a seat, and enjoy, because Omarion Hampton is flying up boards, and I honestly think that this is probably where you see him go. There is a chance you probably see him go even higher, but this is someone that I don't think makes it out of the first round anymore. He has impressed enough at this stage in the game that he's probably going round number 1, somewhere between 32 and like 22. That's kind of where this is, like maybe even like 20, something along those lines within that. Like, again, the Broncos would be like the 20 selection there. If they didn't go wide receiver, they go running back instead. I would throw Omarion Hampton right on the Denver Broncos selection card. So give me Hampton, though, with what they're building over there in LA. At 23, Green Bay Packers. Let's go offensive line and give me Josh Simmons. Another one that I did not really have to think too much about. Josh Simmons, if he did not get hurt, this is probably offensive tackle number 1. Left tackle number 1 in this year's draft class. 6'5", 317. He's got all the size that you need here. Arms sitting around that 33-inch number, so that is probably a conversation that people would have been having leading up to this draft class. But because he's at the 33 mark and not underneath, he's probably getting that conversation as the number 1, with Will Campbell being a number 2 here. But just an unbelievable athlete at what he does. Exceptional lateral mobility, great punch power, elite foot speed, outstanding spatial awareness for what he does. A lot of people seem to feel the same way about Josh Simmons. He is the guy that is left tackle number 1 if he does not get hurt this past season. So for this Pittsburgh Steelers, the Green Bay Packers, I think offensive line, especially at the tackle spot, could use some a little bit of juice, at the very least, a little bit of juice. And I think you go left tackle here with a Josh Simmons. Yeah, you're gambling a bit on the injury here, but at number 23, I feel really good about that, and it's not the biggest of concerns. If it takes a little bit for him to get back and going, you get him rounded out and in form by mid-season, then I think you're feeling pretty good about the selection here at 23. At 24, the Minnesota Vikings, another team that could honestly kind of do just like best player available. And I started leaning more towards the defense because I don't think the offense, unless you want to go maybe offensive line, but for me, I kept going back to defense. Every single time I was trying to settle on a player offensively, it just didn't really make a ton of sense in my head. I kept going defense. And what do I think of when I think of the Minnesota Vikings defense? I think aggressive. I think just ballers, guys that are not afraid to get after it and beat you to the punch defensively. And there is a guy, a defensive back named Malachi Starks, who, if you would allow me to go to his player profile page at 6'1", 197, yeah, only one interception last season, but a guy that's not afraid to get in there, mix it up as a tackler. If you go down to his player profile, we'll go down to some of the strengths of his game here. And when you highlight some of the key words that are on this list, devastatingly effective run defender makes a lot of sense for somebody in Minnesota when you think of just how aggressive they are over there. Natural instincts in zone coverage. You also have violent physicality that shows up in his tackling, drives through ball carriers with textbook form while maintaining explosiveness to deliver impact shots. This is somebody who, when I think of Brian Flores' defense, when I think of what they've done defensively in Minnesota all of last season, it was one of the more exciting defenses to watch with just how aggressive they were. Harrison Smith's obviously not getting any younger. Joshua Metellus is his running mate in the back of that secondary there. I do think you can start the eventual, what is going to need to be a transition away from Harrison Smith once he finally decides to hang it up. It just kind of feels like a year-by-year thing. He's going to keep coming back until he decides he can't anymore. Maybe get a little bit ahead of the ball game. I love Malachi Starks going to Minnesota. Again, everything that was used to describe him there all screams Minnesota Viking defense to me. At pick 25, the Texans, there is one logical answer that I got to here, and it took a little bit of time for me to figure it out, but the offensive line needs a lot of help. And so immediately I go, offensive lineman. Who is this going to be? And I'll be honest, Gray Zabel was not the first person I looked at. I'm looking at Wyatt Millum. I'm looking at Josh Connerly, Tyler Booker, some of the later offensive tackles, Ariante Ursary, who honestly could potentially go in the first round with the way he seems to be flying up boards, and people are saying nothing but positive things about Jonah Savanaya. There's a lot of guys that you could potentially work with here. However, Gray Zabel, I don't want to say disqualified, but just was like, Gray Zabel, FCS school. But then I was like, let me do a little bit of digging on him, take a look at some of the stuff, and what they had to say about him on his draft profile is what sold me here. You look at what he has been able to do, playing basically every single position along the offensive line, is why I am sold on Gray Zabel here. Excuse me, I'm forgetting to flip the screens here. But you look at everything he was able to do. The elite athleticism, big man. He went from being a 240-pound high school lineman to dominating FCS football with the way he has played. Two-time FCS national champion, mind you. This is someone who has played at a ton of different positions along the offensive line, and you can basically have him do whatever you need him to do. And I cannot stress enough how important that is for a team like the Houston Texans, who has watched their offensive line deteriorate to all get out at this point now. If there's somebody that you want to immediately plug into your offensive line, and on top of that, give you the versatility of whether we need him here or we need him there, we know that we can plug in Gray Zabel in that spot. He's the guy to do it. Go after an offensive lineman who's played a ton of different positions along the offensive line, who is very athletic for what he does. Wherever you need to plug him in, because you basically have a hole on the entire left side of your offensive line. And even I would dare say even like I don't think you're really sold on anything along the offensive line this year. And what's funny, and Texans fans, I don't want to sound like I'm calling you out here, but last offseason, I was actually hammering that it should be a focus point for the Texans draft plans last year. And I just kept getting with, it was injuries. Oh, it was injuries. Oh, it was injuries. And it got even worse when all those guys that dealt with injuries came back last year. Offensive line needs a lot of work. Gray Zabel's playing at a ton of different spots throughout his collegiate career. This is someone I think the Texans would absolutely benefit from day one, because wherever you decide you need him, you can probably plug him in and play him there. So go and get yourself a Gray Zabel in this year's draft. At number 26, the Rams. This is where we start seeing that run on defensive ends and edge rushers that I was talking about and alluding to a little bit earlier. We've seen a couple go off the board. I really think that with the way things are shaping up in LA, they're just another defensive piece or two away from solidifying themselves as like a legitimate dominant force. You have so many young guys displaying so much ability and talent over there in LA right now on that defense, from Byron Young to, of course, the 2 draft picks you made last year as well along that defensive front. The secondary could definitely use help here, but I love the idea of just continuing to invest along that defensive front. And might I interest those of you from LA with somebody who has obviously slipped down the board to this point here, as he's labeled as the 16th ranked overall prospect, and we are currently picking at 26. I love the idea of a Shamar Stewart coming in. Now, the big thing with Shamar Stewart, the production not quite where it needs to be. 1.5 sacks is obviously something that sticks out to you there. The production's maybe not quite where you want it to be, but the measurables, testing looked really, really good at the combine. And this is somebody who could be a big help on run defense specifically. And again, just freakish athletic testing at the combine, rare bend and flexibility for somebody of his size at nearly 270 pounds, does a great job of converting speed to power, versatile defensive weapon, keywords right here, who can wreak havoc from multiple alignments. This is, for me, just that next piece. And the way I see it with LA right now, you are essentially hell-bent on filling the gaping hole that is Aaron Donald. You're never going to do that with just one guy, but they did a really good job last year bringing in Jared Verse and Braden Fisk and helping out beef up the just defensive front as a whole. Let's add a little bit more firepower to that. I trust the offense. I'm not worried about what the offense is capable of. Injuries killed the O-line last year. There maybe is a concern on the interior there, what you're going to do, but overall, I'm not worried about the offense. Matthew Stafford going and getting Devontae Adams is something I'm really excited about for them. Of course, you have Puka Nacua, you have Kyron Williams out of the backfield. Beef up the defense some more. Keep working on filling that gaping void that losing Aaron Donald left for the defense. And I think a guy like Shamar Stewart, if he's slipping all the way down to number 26, grab him. Because if you need him to put on a few pounds here or there to really beef him up, depending on what you need to do defensively with him and where you need to fit him in, you can find a place for him in my eyes. At number 27, again, we're talking a run here on defensive ends and edge rushers now. Now, it's very easy to look at a guy like a Nick Scorton, a Jack Sawyer, Princely Uman Mielen, if I'm saying that wrong, excuse me. There's a lot of guys on here, Josiah Stewart, but there's somebody that I really like for the Baltimore Ravens specifically that I told myself I would put here because I think he could potentially sneak into the first round, and I'm not the only person that believes this. Donovan Ezeraku from Boston College, for those of you that may not be familiar with this man's game. Now, if you don't know what I do, my day job, I'm a producer for a football show at a regional sports network where I live. If you follow me on social media, you'll know where that network is. I produced an interview with Donovan Ezeraku a handful of months back. We spoke to him on cam, we spoke to him off cam, before and after. The guy on camera is extremely impressive. The guy off camera, when the lights aren't on, is even more impressive. The things that he explained about where he would like to go and whatnot was just unbelievable. I won't get into the details because, again, all said off camera, doesn't need to be out there if it's not out there already. From production to character to development, 16 and a half sacks last year. This guy, as somebody who grew up in the New England area, not a Patriots fan, watching the heyday of the Baltimore Ravens compete with the Patriots dynasty, being one of the thorns in the sides of that Patriots team that was constantly fighting in the AFC Championship, it felt like every year, and the Ravens were always kind of bugging them, giving them their best shot. Donovan Eziraku fits that Baltimore Raven mold. Productive, unbelievable character, unbelievable. Just this is a guy with a motor that will not stop. Maybe there's a thing or two you're not thrilled of about his game. Maybe it's the fact that he's only 6'2". There's a few things that you could maybe pick out. This is someone in the Ravens system that, if he's there in Baltimore, will wind up being a guy long-term, successful. He'll be there for 10 plus years, probably notch a few All-Pros. He'll make a handful of Pro Bowls. He'll probably be racking up double-digit sacks fairly quickly early on in his career. There's just too much talent in Baltimore already there that adding him into the mix is just going to take that defense to a whole nother level. I would be damned if it's not Donovan Eziraku that finds himself in Baltimore. I will be really disappointed if that's not where he ends up. I really hope it's Baltimore. If it's not Baltimore, I just want it to be a place that is known for building great defensive players. He just fits the Ravens mold to a T in my eyes. The Lions at number 28. We'll go ahead. Again, we're sticking edge rushers. There's a bit of a run on edge rushers going on right now. Nick Scorton would make a ton of sense here. You need to get yourself a guy that you can match up with Aiden Hutchinson once he's back and healthy and ready to go. 5 sacks last year. This is someone that I really like just as a compliment to Aiden Hutchinson. You don't necessarily need somebody to compete with Aiden Hutchinson as the guy, as the pass rusher on your defense. Obviously, that would be nice, but this is a nice compliment to work opposite of him. Really great spin move. Big guy, but very athletic. Again, 6'3", 257. This is somebody that I would really enjoy seeing working alongside Aiden Hutchinson here. Makes a ton of sense in my eyes. We go Nick Scorton working opposite of him. Next pick, again, the run on defensive ends and edge rushers continues. Washington desperately needs to work on that pass rush as well. Jack Sawyer still sitting on the board. He will be the next selection off the edge rusher board because this is basically what the draft has turned into at this point here. He just makes a lot of sense for them. 9 sacks last season, 3 forced fumbles, ton of tackles, guy with a great motor. This is someone that fits the mold of what they're doing over there in Washington right now in my eyes, and I think he can be extremely effective off the edge there. They're doing a ton of reworking with what the defensive line looks like altogether, so if they're not addressing that in round 1, if it's not Jack Sawyer, it's somebody else, whoever's there available that they seem fit, but it's going to be somebody along that defensive line, and I like the idea of a Jack Sawyer there. At number 30, wide receiver, Luther Burden III. I toyed around with the idea of maybe some defensive guys for the Buffalo Bills, but the conversation around Josh Allen having to do it on his own last year was one that potentially won him an MVP award, and rightly deserved. I respect the hell out of what Josh Allen did last year. And I understand where Josh Allen supporters are coming from with it was all him. He was carrying that offense on his back. I get it. Believe me, I do. And I do think it's something that swung the voting in his favor against a Lamar Jackson who is working with Derrick Henry, who was unbelievable last season as well, who only opened up like everything that he could do as a runner himself and as, of course, as a really good polished passer. But Luther Burden III makes way too much sense for me here. You got to get yourself a good wide receiver for that room to work alongside Khalil Shakir. You obviously have a pretty impressive tight end room already as it is. You're working on the extension with James Cook. Get another wide receiver that could work well alongside Khalil Shakir, and Luther Burden feels like that guy in my eyes. At number 31, I could not go anywhere but offensive tackle for the Kansas City Chiefs. And if we look at the offensive tackle board right now, there's a handful of guys that you could maybe look at here, like a Ariante Ursary, if they really love the athletic profile of him. And he is somebody that is getting a lot of noise around him right now, and I'm very much high on him at this current point in time. Josh Connerly is another guy that they could maybe look at as well. 6'5", 311 pounds, big man there, 33.5-inch arms, nice vertical leap and vertical, you think, well, what is a vertical in point for the offensive line? We're talking explosive power coming out of the legs here, so that number does mean something. It's not about how high he jumps, it's about the explosiveness coming from his legs. But this is somebody projected to be early second round. I could see maybe slip into the first round if the Chiefs are really interested in. And then, of course, like we talked about here, Ariante Ursary is another guy, 6'6", 331, 33-inch arms is, again, the conversation. All these arms are pretty short this year in the draft class, but he's over the 33 mark, so there's that. Extreme athlete again, but great size, 6'6", 331, someone that you could stick at the left tackle spot and feel really good about. And that, my friends, is where I land on the Ariante Ursary selection here. The noise surrounding him is getting very loud. Very, very loud. And he's somebody that a lot of people pegged as like a second-round guy, but between character, I've listened to his coach now preaching the praises of his development over his time in Minnesota, and just, again, the prototype frame for the most part, minus arm length maybe not being quite as long as you'd like it to be for somebody that's 6'6". Then there's also the questions of what's going on with the arm length measuring, because the numbers seem to be way off from what everyone's getting measured at pro days. So arm length is one of those things that, like, I can't wait to move past this draft, and I hope it never gets hyper fixated on the way it has this year. But I like Ariante Ursary as the left tackle moving forward in Kansas City. I definitely think they need that done. It needs to be solidified. You can't be playing around at the left tackle spot anymore. And then last, but certainly not least, the Philadelphia Eagles, a team that you could literally just go wherever you want. You could have fun with. I mean, you could go tight end, you could go defensive back. I mean, this is a team that just has an embarrassment of riches at so many different positions here, and you wonder, like, what could this team do? Like, could you go quarterback? No, obviously not. But, like, you could literally do whatever you want, aside, I guess, from quarterback, and you'd be like, okay, yeah, I could see that. But for me, tight end is where I settled on this one here, and Michigan's Colston Loveland sits on the board. I love this pick. Oh, they're not going to let me click on the profile now. Thank you, Draft Buzz here. But Colston Loveland as the second best tight end in the draft makes a lot of sense with so much uncertainty surrounding Dallas Goedert right now. And there was a lot of rumors that maybe he could potentially get moved at the trade deadline last year. I don't want to say he wasn't a factor as much as he has been in the offense last year, but it kind of was the case here. It really was like the Saquon Barkley show, and Goddard, for what it's worth, on the final year of his contract, feels like even more so a potential guy you could see moved at the deadline. So you bring Colston Loveland in anticipation of that move being made down the road, maybe even prior to the season kicking off. You never really know, but 32, Colston Loveland, you get the second best tight end in the draft, a guy that a lot of people really like, and I wish I could pull up his draft profile now. This is someone that makes a ton of sense for me for the Philadelphia Eagles, who, again, could realistically go no wrong with making any selection, because it is, aside from like maybe getting a guy for the defensive front, like if you wanted to go maybe like a new edge rusher, something along those lines, because you watched Josh Sweat depart, and maybe something on the D-line because of Milton Williams' departure, but you still got Jordan Davis, you still have Jalen Carter, and I'm not really worried about like pass rushers just as a whole. For the defense is loaded. The offense is loaded. I mean, you pick what you think you need, and just the easiest road that I was able to travel down was Dallas Goedert, potential trade guy, rumored to be traded last year of his contract. You mitigate that loss and honestly open up the window to maybe move him even earlier if you want to avoid the risk of injury as he goes through this final season, where you can get compensation for him by trading him before the season even kicks off. And that's where I land on Colston Loveland. But that is my first round mock draft. Fire away in the comment section down below. Let me know if I'm a moron. Let me know if you agree, if you disagree. We're just having a good time here. I figured in the spirit of the draft fast approaching, a first round mock draft would be a lot of fun to do. But fire away. Let me know your thoughts, your opinions on all the selections. As always, if you made it to the end, I greatly appreciate it. And I'll see you all next time. Have a good one.